Caleb, Brandon, CK here with another episode of Purple Worship, a podcast about worshiping with your whole life. And today we have a very special episode. So any of us have heard for about a month now is the coronavirus crisis and what we're in and what it means for our life in the here and now. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit, look ahead and explore what's it going to look like once the main threat of this has passed. Some of us start returning to a semblance of normalcy. What does it look like for us to pick up the pieces? So basically, once life returns to semi-normal for the majority of us, how do we as Christians, and then specifically as individuals, I think the church conversation is a different conversation altogether. Mm-hmm. I know our church is doing some specific things, but for us as individual Christians, how do we pick up the pieces? How do we rebuild? What should change? And then what must be regained that we've lost in all of this? So let's have that conversation a little bit. I have some thoughts I'll hold back, but again, I want this to be a little bit more of a conversational exchange. It's a special episode for a special time, so we don't have to stick to the strict rules of conformity. So let's just kind of spitball a little bit. What should we do?
What are the strict rules of conformity for podcasts?
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, I think first, I don't know. There's going to be, I don't know what normal means, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is changing business. It's changing communication. So that's a hard thing. I think we have an opportunity to define new normal.
Sure.
But man, I don't know that we will never go back, to what we had before, because even things like sanitation are going to change. I know at my work there's already conversation of like when we are allowed to reopen the physical office, we're probably going to have to redo a bunch of policies just to put people at ease. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a huge recognition right there. Like, don't expect that normal is going to be anything you necessarily recognize, though right now I think we have a chance to influence it heavily.
Sure. I mean, I saw that crude oil dropped to negative $40 a barrel.
Meaning they're giving it away?
They would pay you. Seriously, so that hasn't ever happened in the history of our nation. So and obviously this is world impacting, not just nation impacting. So I agree that there's a lot to work through and think through, and I think trying to say we, meaning more than the three of us right here, more than my family, is a really difficult question to answer. A lot of times when we say we mean the government, or we mean Americans as a whole. And maybe how do we pick up the pieces is what do I do?
That's good.
What do I need to do in my specific context?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's the thrust of the conversation that I want to have is what do I do? Because we're all in three different locations, three different church contexts, three different culture contexts. I mean, you guys are closer, but you're in a smaller city. CK's in a larger city, in a different line of work. I'm a pastor in Texas. It's a very different response in Texas than most of the world. We're a little late to the party on a lot of things. I think our normal will return a lot faster than other people. Specifically places like California and New York, they probably won't ever get back to anything close to what they had. I mean, it's going to be technology will change things before they're able to get back to the place to where they were, right? So it's going to always be a different world for their kids. Texas, I don't think is going to be like that. I think we already are treating this a little bit more like it's not as big of a deal down here as a whole, government and everything. And so the people around here, the vibe around here, it's kind of almost a little bit lighthearted about it. We fist bump or elbow bump and we'll make a joke about it or whatever. And part of me wonders how long that's going to last. When are we going to go back to shaking hands or giving hugs and not thinking about it, right? So I think the thrust of the conversation, two different things. Not how should we as individual churches respond to our community, but how should Christians, the church, respond in general? So the principles of it, what does it look like for the church to take the primary role in picking up the pieces, right? So this is not government's job to fix this. This is not,
Right.
it's not secularists' job to fix it. It's not school's job to fix it. If it's on us, how do we fix it? How do we help people? How do we encourage people? How do we lift people up? How do we rescue them from whatever the effects of this were on them? And then take it all the way down. What do I do? What's something practical I can do in my community, in my church? What can I do, actually do, you know? So let's talk about that for a minute. Like, what should change permanently? What do you think should change permanently from a Christian's response perspective? Because we've changed a lot of things just in the last month and a half about the way we interact with one another. Is there anything that should change permanently about the way that we think or act or do church or any of that?
I'd really, I'd like, I'd like the, I'd like Christians to have a better. I'm thinking theologically, you know, but like
Mhm.
I'd like Christians to have better, more biblically sound responses to pain and suffering,
Hmm.
and a more cross-centered, heavenly minded kingdom. You know, our kingdom is not on this of this world, on
Sure.
this earth, perspective.
Hmm.
You know, moving through this, you know, like when all these people have lost their jobs, their livelihoods, their savings, that's a really good time to remind people, and be a witness, and even just for our own sake, it's gone, you know,
Right.
like that, you
Yeah.
know, like it just like that. And it doesn't take some massive tragedy. It doesn't take somebody dying in your family. It doesn't take, you know, your spouse dying, your kids dying for your life to just be completely upended.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There could be a global pandemic that never touches you, and yeah, you
Hmm.
could lose your job, you could lose your house, you could lose everything you've worked for on this world. And that's a really a great time to talk about life being a vapor and there being
Yeah.
something more, you know, better and lasting.
Sure.
So like as far as like big top level principles, that'd be, you know, I would want the church to just the church's witness to be more
Mm,
sound in
Mm.
that way.
yeah. And I think even our response to the whole thing,
Kill the
uh,
prosperity preachers. Not kill them literally.
right.
Not
Yeah.
kill them
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
I mean, kill the prosperity gospel.
Let's
Yeah.
make
If-
sure
if-
they all get it.
if
Yeah.
That would be
it's
the
time to
ultimate
do
irony,
anything.
though, right? It would be the ultimate irony if
Well,
every single prosperity preacher had
so
COVID.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, when this first started doing an outbreak, there was a very popular healing service that they canceled right away. It's like, wait, you're a healing service, like, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
and I
Right.
think that you're right. Like, this has exposed the crack. Anytime you put like exponential pressure on a system, all the little cracks start getting exposed, right? And so whether it be like in software, like what I do, like if you have an influx of users like Zoom, you know, like influx of users, all the little cracks start getting exposed. And I think the
Yep.
same thing happens to our faith or to society writ large, because anytime you take something that was running pretty well, but let's be honest, didn't have the infrastructure it needed, like within our churches to support our members remotely. How was our benevolence and hospitality doing, you know, when all this kicked off? Like, how quickly were we able to respond to these things and actually also have a proper response to government and not be like, no, we're going to keep meeting, like,
Right.
and in a fly in the face kind of way, you know, like that was some churches responses. And so for the church, the invisible church, my hope is that like we will come out of this and people will look at Christians and say, what did you do with this opportunity? Like you guys were saying, like, what did you do? You have an opportunity right now to be the best version of Christianity to a really sick and dying world, literally, but to a world that is confused and scared. And so that means like when we reopen our church, we need to be over the top ready to be accommodating to people, to be that all things to all people, whether that means like hand sanitizer at the door or it means letting people know like we've taken extra care to clean or whatever it might be to help put people at ease, because that's a way we can love them and we can show that love to them in that kind of sacrificial way, above and beyond. And I think being above reproach in that is really important for the church right now, and even going forward, because like you said, people are going to come at this in waves, right? Like some people are going to come back and be like, sweet, let's do it, meet you at coffee, you know. And then some people are going to be like, I don't want to even still go outside for a while.
Yeah.
Some people, you know, it's just, there's going to come in waves. And I feel like we just need to be the even tone, like we're always supposed to be, just the even tone throughout society, where it's like, yeah, you know, this is a big deal right now, but God's got it under control. Yeah, I know you're freaked out. God's got it under control. Like, and just being that peaceful tone is, I mean, to me, it's like, it's Proverbs 3:27 says, you know, whenever you possibly can, do good to those who need it. And I think that's our response. Like, that's got to be what we come out of this.
Right.
And I know that's a long-winded way to say all that, but I really feel like the church as a whole right now has a responsibility to say, the moment we're not doing this in this way, like, how are we going to help set that even tone so that people look to us and say, like, wow, what do you, like, how did you guys get through this, you know? And the way we've been reacting to it right now also will be on display, and it's going to be on record. So hopefully we've made some good decisions along the way.
Sure. Yeah, I think, you know, in regard to like reaching out to the community, things like that, I think a lot of the things you're saying are really, really good points of advice. I think my hope is that the uncommitted Christians to a local church body will have experienced a desperate lack of community and realize what they're missing, and also those who have been committed to a local church body will be more grateful for it, because it's the whole you take it for granted until it's taken away thing.
I was literally going to say one of my biggest prayers, and one of the things I've told a lot of people is God works all things together for good in 1,000 different ways, a million different ways. But please, God, cause your people to love your church,
right?
You know, and to love corporate worship. You know, you know, cause people to value that more, and see the great and awesome and wonderful benefit that it is to us as believers, and then let that reinvigorate us to make it be the benefit that it's supposed to be to society, you know, as well.
Yeah,
we have a chance to kind of start fresh with some of that. You know, I don't know for sure what will happen when we get done. You know, there'll probably be people who profess to be Christians who don't come back, you know, when the doors open back up. There'll probably be a lot of people who come, you know, because they're searching for answers. So what a time to have believers reinvigorated for
I can tell you that
the gospel.
That first communion coming back is going to be pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, you know, when we haven't been able to meet physically, and that's the way that we can show the world who, like, are remembering Jesus until he comes back, right? As that's our public display of it, is to just proclaim his death until he comes. That is for churches that haven't met physically, one of my biggest prayers is that, especially for our church, that we would just take communion real seriously, that is like, we are at his table together, and you know, we haven't been able to do that for a while, and like, all right, we get to come back and feast again, you know. This is a big deal.
Yeah. And I think the other side of that coin, and you started to allude to it a little bit, Brandon, and you too, CK, earlier, you were talking about you know, our response to the community at large. So unbelievers who may show up because they've been lonely for a long time. And I hope the majority of us have not missed our chance to be Jesus to them in this time, before these things get lifted, so that we have the opportunity to then prove the fact that we've cared enough about them so that they'll seek community with the people of God and ultimately be drawn to the beauty of Christ. That's another prayer that I have. We've been encouraging our people as leaders in our church to just be active, reaching out in their community, bring cookies by people's houses, or whatever you can do that you feel you and they would both be comfortable with.
Right.
Because you don't want to do something that is going to be offensive
Right.
or scary, but anything you can do to show that you're thinking and caring and that they're
Yep.
not alone. Because a lot of people don't have church or a group of friends
Mm.
or family or any of that they've been able to stay in touch with. And it's different all around. Like in Texas, we basically were under a stay-at-home order, but most everybody is still driving around. The streets aren't ghost town like you hear in a lot of places. The streets are ghost town in LA.
Yeah.
It's not really like that here. Like everybody's still driving and going places, but in a lot of
Mm.
places where it has been a ghost town, there's going to be a different degree of loneliness, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So Christians in those areas, man, we have got to be reaching out now. Like if you haven't been doing it already for the last month and a half, do it now. Reach out to the people and let them know you've been thinking about them. Let them know you care. Ask them if they need something. If you have somebody
Right.
that's elderly and really at risk on your street, go get them some groceries. Those are the type of practical things that we can do now before this ends. Do we have any other thoughts about principially before this ends, before we kind of transition into some more practical things after it ends?
Yeah, just echoing some of those same, I could be wrong, but we've said this, but I just really do think that people need to really prepare for um, uh, wave of
Mm.
people who have had their lives uprooted, upended, destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
and searching
Mm.
for answers. And I think even maybe professing believers who bought into the prosperity gospel type thinking will need answers too.
Yeah.
So while we're thinking about the ministerial aspect practically, doing those things, the more that we engage people, the more they're going to ask us, the more that we're going to get close to them, and then they'd be, why did God do this?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you let this
Yeah.
happen? There's no way that he can bring good from my daughter dying or whatever, and
Right.
we better take time to have good answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I think there'll be a lot of thorny ground nominal Christians who got their faith choked out.
Yeah.
And they may not be searching for answers in the
Mm.
right places. We have a responsibility to them as well. And, just one more thing on that. I felt that God was impressing on me a couple weeks ago to start planning for some form of, you can call it evangelistic outreach if you want to, but some form of that to come on the heels of this, where we've just been praying about it, we've been fasting over it, and we haven't really, I told my other fellow pastors here, we don't even really market it, but we just trust God and something might happen, and I think that we may experience some ripe ground for all the reasons that we've been talking about, where people are just like, I don't know where else to go,
Mm.
and sometimes God's got to get people in that position before they'll listen to him. It's not ideal, obviously, and you gotta nurture those people, because they, there's a lot of Christians who may or may not be Christians in name only, who chase God for the things that he can give them and not for God himself. So you got to be careful about that. But I think our response now and then ultimately should be Jesus. We should just be
Right.
like,
Oh,
there's a whole
really?
bunch of hurting people. We got to help them,
But it's so easy.
We got to help
That's
them and
it?
point them to Christ. That's pretty
Yeah.
much it. It's pretty simple.
So cliche.
I know.
That's-
I'm very unoriginal. So the thing that kept resonating in my mind as we kind of transitioned a little bit more into practicality, I was thinking about this all day and a little bit yesterday too, and I was just like, widows and orphans. I don't know why, but it just kept popping up in my head. James 1:27, pure religion, undefiled, widows and orphans. And my thought today on that was, life is going to become much more normal for a lot of us, but there's a segment of our population that's going to take a lot longer to get back to normal. That would include the elderly. That would include people who are extremely vulnerable. My mind goes to people in third world countries that were hit really hard with this, like in Uganda, where my family works. We not only had coronavirus, but you also, on top of that, had a dictator like regime, not
Mm-hmm.
technically a dictator, but he acted like one and prevented people from accessing food and medical care and water. And then you had locusts that just came and destroyed all their crops all at the same time. So there's going to
Crazy.
be people like that as well. Um, and when we talk about widows and orphans, the people that we try to help first and foremost over there fit that description. They're child-headed families. Both parents have died. You've got a 15-year-old kid with 8 brothers that goes and gets married trying to take care of that family. Those types of people, life is not going to be, I mean, like that. If you're in Uganda as a child-headed family, your normal's not great anyways, but
Yeah,
life
right.
is not going to be normal for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for the most vulnerable, here, there, everywhere, when life returns to a semblance of normal for us, and especially for people like us where our lives haven't changed that much,
Mm.
none of us lost our jobs, none of us have been strapped financially. Most of us, at least the 3 of us here, have a very similar schedule, even though we're working from home as far as work and all of that. Not really cutting hours, any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So we're in a position that a lot of people aren't in. What's our responsibility to the most vulnerable, especially for us having kind of weathered the storm in a
Right.
different place?
adopt babies.
Yeah. I
You know,
mean, yeah, absolutely.
and encourage other people to adopt babies.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah. There's more now. Like it was already pretty bad here in America, and it's getting worse
Yeah.
because of this.
Mm.
So adopt,
Yeah.
adopt.
Hmm.
That's really good. Yeah, I think a powerful concept that the way you kind of set this up is, how do we pick up the pieces?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have an opportunity to pick up the ones that make the most sense for society. We were driving by an empty mall today, actually, and I told my wife that, there's a lot of stuff that we can do. And there's a lot of things that we can go like fill our time with and spend our money on and things like that. And I'm certainly no model of any of these things, but like the the way that we reassemble a normal is going to say a lot about our priorities and our eternal priorities.
Hmm.
And we could just reopen all the stores. We could just go back to all our things. We have a lot less shows to watch now, right? Because everybody's watching more shows. So like, it's like there's we could just go back to all of that, or we could choose to omit some things that don't make sense anymore, and like, you didn't really miss it. Did you really miss going to that place or doing that thing? uh and it's okay to just not do it anymore, and to choose to use that energy somewhere else. Like,
Hmm.
I think it's a powerful concept, and I'm trying to figure out, what those might be. I know for us, um we have recommitted our things like which local charities do we support, where are we putting our dollars and our we're putting our money where our mouth is.
Mm-hmm.
Just things like that, like, oh, I'll get to that, I'll eventually set that up, make sure that donation goes through or whatever. And months go by, and then all of a sudden this hits, and I was like, I need to make sure all of this stuff is up to date, and I hadn't. Like, I went back through and I was missing stuff, and I was like, oh my goodness, I haven't been putting my money where my mouth is. And just even that kind of stuff, just making sure that, we assemble that piece back into it, and we don't be like, okay, well, they're probably good now, and, cut
Yeah.
our donations or things like that. Yeah, that's, for me, that's a big one right now. It's just due diligence on everything.
Yeah.
So this is off topic, but it's because of what you said. Just the idea of restructuring things, and something really interesting that I just thought about is, with all of the businesses going under,
Mm.
there's so many. There could be a really interesting and neat opportunity for Christians who have the ability to start businesses to be able to fill um,
Mm.
gaps, industry gaps, with better businesses, more integrity,
Yeah.
Things like that. So I don't even know what that could look like, but it seems to me that for those who have the ability to, on the other side of this,
Hmm.
we could do some real social impact, just even in that way, hiring people
Yeah.
and paying them well, hiring people and taking care of them, and being good employers. And plenty of people lost jobs that they needed, but they were bad jobs. So
Yeah, that's really good too. And I mean, there's also the other side of this, which is our civic response. Um, you have a vote in this country,
yeah,
so people went on record and reacted to this in different ways at different levels of government and in different states. And like, Caleb was saying, all three of us live in different states. So like all of our states responded slightly differently to this. You can vote and you can decide if that was a good thing. And, it sucks to have like a big, microscope put on people in these kind of things, because it's never fair to anybody,
yeah,
and you can say whatever you want about people in public office, but like this is not a fair fight for anyone. But it also shows true colors, and it really does bring out what's motivating them and different things like that. So use your vote, use these things that we've been given in this nation to influence. And I'm talking to myself, and do the due diligence on researching candidates and issues and things like that, and get involved, because it's a big deal. First Peter 2:17 I always go back to, because it has four simple like responsibilities for every person and for Christians, but I mean like for everybody, but for Christians in specific, it says show proper respect to everybody. So that's everyone, your neighbor. Love the family of believers, that's the church. Fear God, all men are supposed to do that, and honor the emperor, or honor the king, whoever's in charge. Even in the broken systems that we're in, like I think those four things are, even though we're talking really practical stuff at the moment, those are four things that for me, I need to figure out, how do I make these four things and express these in those practical ways, like you guys were saying. Like what are the practical expressions of these things that I should reassemble?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on it a little earlier too. One really important responsibility for those of us who have been less affected is to remember there are pieces to be picked up. Our lives are going to
Ouch.
feel
That's good.
similar to how they used to feel.
yeah,
And to realize that there's people around us who
Hmm.
are experiencing the deepest pain they've ever experienced,
yeah,
not just close to us, but very far away, places like Africa, to just have
Yeah.
a greater awareness of who we're called to be. The church, like I mentioned earlier, the church is the ones who should be picking up these pieces. And so the church is made up of the three of us as well as other believers. And so for me especially, it's going to be really hard, because my life, I've said this a lot of times, my life has not changed hardly at all. I've always worked from home. I live right behind the church. I work in the church. I come in the church on Sunday to do the live stream. The only difference is there's not 50 to 60 to 70 people in the audience when we're doing the live stream. So my Sunday's basically the same. We added a couple of things to our routine, but it ended up just being more like family time, and everything has just been very, very the same. Thankfully, God, didn't cut my wages, and so like money wise, we've been the same. It's been very, very much the same. And so once normal comes for a lot more people, it's going to be real easy to be in a bubble.
That's good.
And it's really easy for us in general to be in a bubble. I mean, we're Americans. Most people are okay. Most people are making it. There's tons of people in our communities who are not making it. So I'm going to make a concerted effort myself, particularly at the community level. I tend to have my own personal stuff. I tend to have a much more greater built-in awareness towards the international needs, just because I live that life constantly, working with a Ugandan nonprofit and just having that be put before me, and having been there so many times. But I have a much harder time not living in my American bubble to the people around me. So just on the community level, I'm going to be trying to do greater outreach, particularly gospel outreach. I mean, like right now, people need to hear the message of the gospel more than ever. And that's not my strong suit. I'm much better at speaking to the people that are already for Jesus, and much worse at speaking to the people who are against him. So I'm going to be challenging myself to do a lot more gospel spreading, and then encouraging my people to do some others as well. You know, my family, my young people that I teach, and the church as a whole, because I think this is going to be a really important time for us. You mentioned, CK, the different responses of people, and I think it's going to be really extra important for the church to take bullets away from the enemy, by doing right. You know, I don't remember if it was said this episode or the last one we talked about, but I think it was the last one. But we were talking about good intentions. Good intentions are great, but I love this quote. It's not enough to mean well. We have to do right. And so doing right, whatever that is before God, do right, and then also factor in the fact that doing right before God includes, built into it, a love for neighbor. And we need to do that in such a way that we're taking bullets away from the enemy, who can look at us and say, idiot church, they're responsible for spreading this, they're responsible for all of these other things, and they don't love their community, they're not reaching out, they're just staying in their little club, there's churches all over America that are going to be totally deserving of that. And I don't want to be one, and I don't want to be part of one. And I think as individual Christians, we need to make sure that we're doing the same thing too. CK, you're better at that than I am. You were talking me into that a little bit on Thursday night. There's the
just reminding you,
the justice warrior part of me that sees injustice and is like, I don't care. I don't want the injustice. But I do think it's really important for us to de-weaponize to whatever degree we can. You know, the Bible says, live at peace with all men as much as it depends on you, right? It doesn't always depend on us. They're gonna call names and throw stones, but it's a lot harder to make accusations stick if you're doing right.
Give hugs.
Man, I'm gonna be excited when people don't give that a second thought. You know?
Yeah. No, I'm serious. Like those practical things, man. Like
I think you know, you guys said it'll be a long time. I think that every time somebody coughs for a long time, it's like, and it's, yes, it's comical. It really is. Like I just I fear coughing all the time right now.
Right.
You know, like even just a you know, but
right.
You know, it's going to be a long time before people aren't scared of that. Even if things are moving back to normal, we just got to live with. That's a weird cultural thing now, you know. And giving hugs is going to turn into a weird cultural thing.
It is.
And there's a lot of interesting, to say the very least, opportunities that lie ahead, I think, for Christians to try to figure out how to show love to people during that time. We use the strange phrase "love on people," and I don't know what that means exactly, but you know, the ability or need for loving people will be. We have to walk through that. It might be loving to like hold your coffin with all your might until you can get 10 feet away from it. Like, we might need to continue to think about those types of things.
Yep.
Yeah, we do. You're right.
So, yeah, I can't even. Yeah, I can't even. You know, I told you guys when we started, like, you say, what's the practical? Like, my head just explodes, you know, with all the possible things that could lie in front of us.
Yeah, here's something everybody can do, and I think we can end with this. I was telling CK on Thursday that I think one of the best definitions that I've ever heard of encouragement I heard this past week: pouring courage into people. So how can we pour courage into people during this time? You just mentioned, Brandon, there's going to be a lot of people who are living in a state of fear. So first of all, it's on us to not do that, right? You know, God has not called us into a spirit of fear. He's called us to be wise, but not to be fearful or paranoid or skittish or any of those things. So be wise and be kind, but don't be afraid. And then some of that courage that you have, that God is giving to you, you need to use that and pour it into people who have less. And just lift them up constantly. Call them and say, "Hey, how you doing? God has not given us a spirit of fear." Preach the gospel to them. Jesus died so that whatever you're going through right now is going to be ultimately redeemed. All of those things, whether they've lost their job, whether they've lost family members, whether they're actually currently sick, or whether they're just an older person who's afraid to go out.
Right.
We have a responsibility to pour courage into those people. So for me, especially, I don't know that I have the spiritual gift of encouragement, and I think we're all commanded to have that one. And so I wanna develop that in myself. So just to have that top of mind, right? Just have that constantly in my mind. How can I pour courage into you today? And I think that's a big key to how we pick up the pieces.
Yep, 100%.
All right, so this is the Purple Worship Podcast. We're reminding you once again that every minute of every day, including through the coronavirus crisis, you're worshiping something. And so worship God. We'll see you next time.